Okay, thank you everybody for joining today. My name is Brian Jones with EDX Wireless. I see some familiar names, so some of you I've spoken with directly and helped out with projects in the past. Others maybe I haven't spoken with. But my role at EDX is customer success, and so if you're a current EDX SignalPro user and you're entitled to a quarterly check-in meeting with our support team and myself to sort of go through it, whether you've got any pain points and what use cases you're looking at in the software. And I'd like to encourage everyone to take advantage of that. If you've got ongoing work in the software, I'd be happy to join a meeting and talk through your projects with you and talk about any new projects that you're looking at or new use cases where maybe we can help you to really get the best out of the software and show you something that you might not have seen before. And that's really the topic of today's webinar here is what's new in the EDX SignalPro, and sort of I can give you a high-level overview of how to use that. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And you should now be seeing a SignalPro project here with, this is actually a hypothetical outdoor Wi-Fi, fixed wireless access Wi-Fi sort of a use case that we're looking at. And this is really just so that I can talk through some of the new features that have just come out in the last, I think, 2 quarters here in SignalPro. And the first high-profile feature is a major update to our Wi-Fi module. In the past, in previous releases, if you were doing Wi-Fi, that was part of the WiMAX wireless broadband module, and you set that up as just another 802.11. Well, those features were in need of an update in order to stay up to date with all of the latest 802.11 standards and to be able to support BSSIDs and some of those other things. And so we've separated Wi-Fi out now as being sort of its own special enough technology, special enough flavor to get some extra support. And it now supports all of the new 802.11 flavors, all the new 802.11 standards. And I just want to show you a couple of things if you're working with a Wi-Fi project, a couple of things to be aware of. If you have an older Wi-Fi project and you'd like to talk about how to update that and bring that up to date with the new features and so forth, please do feel free to reach out to us or reach out to the support team through the edx.com support portal. But if I'm starting a Wi-Fi project from scratch now, I would do just like I would with any type of project, where I would first set up a site template to look like my access point. In this case, I'm using a 5.8 gigahertz. And the system name or type, I go ahead and select as Wi-Fi. And of course, I'm going to select one of my MIMO antenna options, which of course, those can be configured over under RS Systems, MIMO, and adaptive antennas. And I'll want to set up the adaptive modulation table for the particular bandwidth and the particular flavor of 802.11 that I'm working with. But then under Wi-Fi networks, system details, and service area, I'm going to go in here and define the rest of the details for the technology. So here I can, choose what standard I'm working with. And if I've configured my adaptive modulation tables, I can select that from the drop-down here. And beyond that, we've made some expansions to the site details. If I jump into a site here, you can see I've now got a section to put in the BSS ID of that access point. So if you're working with an existing Wi-Fi network and you're looking to avoid BSSID conflicts, you can import all of those sectors through the spreadsheet editor and keep those BSSIDs with them. And we can use those. There's a conflict generator or a conflict resolver that I'll show you here in a moment, that we can use those BSSIDs to keep track of what we would normally think of as a sector in a SignalPro project. And we've still got a sector ID associated with that and everything, but now we've got this additional ID element, the BSSID. And normally, all of those would be unique in a network, but especially in private networks, there are some use cases where you might want to have multiple access points using the same BSSID. And in that case, if I go into my Wi-Fi networks here, BSSID conflict, I've got a tool here that will look at the BSSID of every access point in my project. And in this window here on the top left, it will show me any place where I have two access points using the same BSSID. So I kept the numbers simple here so that everybody's eyes wouldn't cross trying to look at them. But I have two different access points using the same 0001 BSSID. And so it's going to point that out to me, and I can either go in and change one BSSID or the other, or I can push this into the allowed conflicts list. So if there are sites that it's okay that they're sharing the same BSSID because they don't have a lot of overlap in coverage area, then I can push that down into the allowed conflicts, and it's not going to argue with me about it. Well, how do I know if these two access points have an overlap? This quick little window here can show me at a glance sort of the likelihood of an overlap between these two access points. Obviously, this is not based on a real propagation calculation, because that would take too long potentially in a large project to look at each one of these and their overlaps. I could go back out to the main map and do that with the propagation model if I wanted to really make sure about how much overlap there was between two sites. But just with this graphic, at a glance, I can sort of see, I'll make this line thicker in case it's hard for anybody to see. I can sort of see what the likelihood is of these access points overlapping. And maybe I decide, oh, I don't want to push that into the allowed list. I want to go ahead and change the BSSID for one or the other of these. And then over here on the right, finally, I've got all those sectors that maybe these are new sectors in my project or new access points, and so they don't have a BSSID yet. Well, here's where I could go ahead and input one easily. I can also get to this, again, through the spreadsheet editor sector data, if I need to import them all for a bunch of assets, or I can get to them directly within the site properties for the site. And so with our Wi-Fi access points, that's really how we're keeping track of individual access points. And you can take care of that all now with the BSSID conflict. The neighbor lists tool here also will generate all of my neighbor lists for each access point. And that's a deliverable that you would commonly want as part of setting up the Wi-Fi network, is to have those neighbor lists for each access point. This is fairly straightforward. I can go ahead and set up my minimum RSSI, maximum distance. I have a place to choose the transmitter groups, and then I can go ahead and click run. And if I like the results that I've gotten here, I can go ahead and hit apply to apply those. And bear in mind, you can modify these as well. So with those new features on Wi-Fi, and those are all brand new features, the BSSID and the neighbor listing. Any of the existing features from Wi-Fi, if you were used to using that under the WiMAX module, things like your automatic traffic planning, automatic frequency planning, and of course, using any of the features indoors, those are all available with the new Wi-Fi module as well. So let me just touch on those items. When we're talking about traffic loading, so we want to show, or we want to make an estimate of how many users there are per square kilometer and what their traffic demands are. And then we want to look at the coverage footprint of each access point and make an estimate for how heavily loaded that access point is going to be. And if I go down to traffic loading here under the network design menu, in my traffic definitions and densities here, I can go into the definitions and I'm going to set up different types of users. So I can call this typical mobile user or what have you, and put in their demand rate in megabits per second on the uplink and the downlink. And then how I distribute those users around the service area, I can base this on a uniform distribution, or I can have the number of users per square kilometer within each clutter type. So if you're using high resolution clutter, you can make sure that any of the open in urban areas have a certain number of users assigned, but things like, water or places where you couldn't have users, you can have 0 users assigned, and it'll look at the land use distribution within that coverage footprint. Of course, if you're using a traffic database, you can do that too. And I'll talk about multi-point in a moment, but we can support traffic loading based on point to multi-point as well. And so I would set up that traffic distribution, and then the calculate average traffic load on each sector is going to go through again and look at the coverage footprint of each one of the access points and estimate the amount of loading for that access point. And if I choose on my mobile remote unit, if I choose load-based noise rise, that will appropriately apply additional noise rise the more heavily loaded the sector is. And that can have a lot of impact on the performance of a heavily loaded network. So if you want to look at how a network may perform under a heavy load, that's the way you would approach it, is by first assigning those traffic estimates and then going in here and turning on the noise rise. And when we run our signal to noise ratio studies or data rate or anything like that, it's going to take that traffic-based noise rise into account. This feature is available on WiMAX and other broadband technologies as well. And it also works for LTE. If you're, this is not brand new. We've had this now in the software all year, but you can do the same thing with LTE networks under LTE Pro and the traffic loading. And so especially if you're looking at the network under the loading of a bunch of users, you really want to go through this process. So I think that's all of the new, the other feature I should talk about that we've had for a while, but it's included with the Wi-Fi module, is the auto placement functions. And this can be either automatic site selection for an area or automatic site selection for a fixed multi-point network. So if you have a service territory you're required to cover, or a bunch of fixed assets you're required to cover, and you want to choose from the available towers, you can go into this auto placement for areas and set up a propagation model to use for that, the candidate list of all the places you could put an access point, and then your service territory down here. And then you can set up, if you've got a large area study grid, you can subsample that to have the function work more quickly if you need to. And this feature set is one that sometimes people try it out and they run into initial difficulty because it takes too long to run, or they're not really sure what to do with all of these settings, and so they just give up on it. This is another area where we've seen that customers that are taking advantage of this can save a lot of time in their design and sometimes come up with a more efficient design that uses fewer towers than they would have on their own. So I really recommend trying out this automatic placement function if you have not yet. And if you're not sure how to use it and you'd like some instructions, our knowledge base on the edx.com website, if you go to edx.com and go to the support portal and go to knowledge base, there's an article in there. If you just look up automatic site placement or just automatic, you'll get the article that'll take you step by step through how to use that automatic site placement and take advantage of having it choose those tower locations for you. And bear in mind, that can be capacity sensitive so that you'll get enough sites in your dense areas. And that can also be cost sensitive, where if you have different relative costs for deploying on one location versus another, that can be taken into account as part of the solution. So our Wi-Fi module is up to date and full featured. It's got all of the features that you were used to using potentially through the broadband module, and then updated support for BSSIDs and all of that kind of thing. The other thing worth really talking about as part of broadband, whether we're talking about Wi-Fi or LTE or 5G, are the BDC filing studies. If you're working here in the United States and you're doing broadband, then you need to do these BDC filings with the FCC, and they have a very particular way that they want you to show the areas that are covered or not. And so that's what I'm showing here, my cell edge coverage study. This is a new study that's been added for LTE, Wi-Fi, and WiMAX wireless broadband. And if you've got any of those modules and set up a project for one of those technologies, then you can go in and add this cell edge coverage study. And I'm going to go ahead and go into the area study details here. This study name, cell edge coverage, it's under the basic studies because it can use more than one technology if you've got multiple technologies, multiple system types within your same project. So the cell edge coverage is our BDC filing cell edge coverage study the way they want it. And what I would do is for the BDC filing settings, this button right here, if I drill into that, each technology has requirements for what you're supposed to be able to deliver in terms of data rate and so forth for that technology in order to say that you're covering that area under the BDC guidelines, or rules, I should say. And so you'll put in those requirements here, and you can also put a global cell loading. So you can say, here's what it looks like under this amount of traffic loading. Or we can use the cell-specific loading if you're doing LTE or 5G. And so we set up the options for the BDC filing the way we need it for this technology. And then when I run this, it runs, there's a couple different studies it has to run for coverage and throughput on the uplink and the downlink. And it'll run all of those under the hood and create one study result that just shows covered or not covered, like you see here. I've got them assigned as green and kind of pink. And so these are ready to export and send off to the FCC along with a description of, what software you generated them with and all that kind of thing, so that you can do those BDC filings without having to add multiple studies and combine them together. And, it was a whole process to do that before. Now we've given you just a nice, easy feature to go ahead and run this one study and send those off to the FCC. So the BDC filings are a big time saver at this point as well. And yeah, I'm just checking the question and answer. If anybody does have any questions as we're going through this, feel free to go in on the Q&A section and type those questions in. Obviously, nobody can talk right now, but if you've got any questions, feel free to type those in, and I can either address them here or we can reach out to you after the fact. So another thing that is, it's not an entirely brand new feature, but it's greatly expanded this year, are the per sector studies. And let me go ahead and show just my received power at remote study here. The per sector option, if I go into my area studies list, you can see I've got a checkbox here that says run per sector. And what this does is normally, if this option is off, when you run an area study, it will combine the coverage from all the sectors in that study group, and it just produces one coverage map that's the combination of, the strongest server for each location fills in that location's value in the study. But very often you may have situations where you want to be able to quickly switch and show the coverage of just a single site within the overall coverage. And it used to be that if you wanted to do that, you would have to, set one site as active or put it in its own group and run a study against that group. And so it could be kind of time consuming and took extra steps in order to look at the coverage from just one site. What the per sector study option does, if you check that on, the study is going to take a little bit longer to run, and it's going to take a little bit more space on the hard drive because it's going to store the individual coverage footprint of each site within the study along with the overall coverage. So I've run this receive power at remote study in per sector mode, and right now we're looking at just the overall combined coverage from these sites. Well, maybe I say, gosh, I want to see how well just this site, or since we're talking Wi-Fi, I should say just this access point, I want to see its coverage footprint. So what I would do is drill into this, go to its BSS ID, and select focus. And once I select a focus sector, the label turns red there. And then if I go to the options for this study, so I'm going to right click on this and choose display focus sector. And now it's showing me just the coverage from that focus sector rather than the overall combined coverage. And I can see, boy, this access point does cover a lot of area out here to the southwest. And if I wanted to look up the hill a little bit at what its neighbor up here on the next street over covers, I would just simply switch this to the focus, and that's going to go ahead and switch and show me that footprint. So if this applies to you, if this is something where you frequently might want to go and look at the individual area study result, you can use those per sector studies and do this quickly and easily without having to rerun anything. So the new feature is that we have expanded this per sector concept to apply to both route studies and area studies. So if you're doing transportation work and you're doing route studies along a particular road corridor or highway or railway, whatever, you can run those studies with the per sector option turned on and then see the coverage from individual focus sectors along that route anytime you want. And by the same token, we can do that for multi-point studies as well. you'll see I've got the run per sector option available for this. And if I want to see the, the downlink data rate from just a particular focus sector to each of my CPEs, I can do that really quickly by running these in per sector mode and then just switching which sector is the focus. And that works exactly the same way. This display focus sector is available for any of those studies. And just in talking with customers, especially on the operations side of things, where you've got a live network that you're working with, and you might often want to drill into the coverage of a particular site, I really think this per sector feature is going to save a lot of time as you're going through and working with projects and trying to understand the coverage that you have. Speaking of point to multipoint, and let me go ahead and I'm going to change up my layers here a little bit. Let's show some CPEs and let's show some multipoint study results. If you are running point to multipoint, obviously the Wi-Fi module has been updated with up-to-date Wi-Fi studies, and I spoke briefly a moment ago about the traffic loading, and I pointed out that under the traffic loading function here, you can now select multipoint traffic from CPE as an option. And let's look at what that does here. If I go into the details for just any of my CPEs, oh, whoops, I'm looking at the wrong place. I have to look at my CPE type. So I've got my CPE types set up along the top here, and I've just got one in this example. I've got it set up as a rooftop subscriber. And I can give this an average downlink data rate and uplink data rate, and then an activity factor. So in other words, this is how much data the user is likely to demand on an ongoing basis on average, and for both the uplink and the downlink. And then the activity factor is how often that user is going to be using those data rates. And so this is just a scaling factor, really. And oftentimes, to keep the numbers straight in my head, I just keep my activity factor at 100%. But this gives you an easy way to say, well, what if we're at 50% of the data demand, or what have you? And once I have set those CPE demands for my different CPE types, then, and so I could have, a residential subscriber versus a commercial subscriber, premium package versus standard, whatever you want to do, and you can give them different data rates. And then each one of my CPEs has a CPE type associated with it. And if I go and run the traffic loading using those multi-point subscribers, then the data that gets assigned back, or the data rate that gets assigned back to the sector as its predicted loading level, is going to be based on that fixed multi-point demand level, and not trying to do some users per square kilometer type of calculation. And so again, especially if you're looking at FWA with any technology, 5G, LTE, or Wi-Fi, or one of the proprietary technologies, Cambium, there's a ton of other players out there. If you're doing fixed broadband, it really makes great sense to use that traffic loading from multipoint in order to get a good sense of loading. And of course, you can use that for the noise rise calculation as well. Finally, and I know I'm up to a half hour here, I've got just one last sort of coming soon item to show you. This isn't quite available in the software yet, but this is coming soon. We've had for quite a while this other information item in the site details, that it lets you put in the site address, who the owner is. You can make notes if you've taken pictures of the installation, you can add image files, that kind of thing. And so this is often useful sort of on the operations side. It doesn't necessarily always get leveraged for every project, especially if you're just doing sort of initial pre-planning. But I wanted to point out that this is there. And what's new in this dialogue is some extended information that we've got some new features in here that are specifically relevant to Wi-Fi and or 5G and LTE. And a couple of the interesting ones are the batteries and number of batteries. And then we've also got a capacity field here. And so far, these are just items that you can put in there as additional information to keep track of them with the site. But we've got some reporting features coming on that are going to be useful. And this button, the sustainability button, this is also going to show up in your software soon. And what this is going to allow us to do is enter some metrics on the power demands of sectors on that site. And, you can see I've got a bunch of different metrics here that I can put on this that will allow me to keep track of how much power utilization is going on across the entire network. And that, of course, is for sustainability calculations. You know, if we're going to compare technologies or compare one network configuration to another, one of the big metrics to evaluate those configurations going forward is going to be not just the number of assets in the field and whether they serve the capacity, but how much power is required to do that, and which of these network configurations is more sustainable. And so that's something our dev team is working on right now. Again, the reporting is not yet available for this, so we're just putting in the numbers right now. But I would say probably early next year, we'll have new sustainability reporting and comparison functions that are going to add a lot of usefulness to the tool, especially where broadband is concerned. I think I'm looking down my list of bullet points here, and I think I have hit all of the new items in the last couple of quarters. It looks like no one has entered any questions into the Q&A field right now. I'll go ahead and let's take a couple minutes. If anybody has any questions about these features, go ahead and type them into the Q&A field. Or again, if you'd rather talk in more detail about your project and the use cases that you're looking at now, do feel free to reach out to your sales account manager or reach out to the support team, and we can set you up with a customer success session and talk specifically about your use case. I'll give folks just a couple minutes here in case somebody's writing a book. Okay, well, I guess I must have been terribly clear about all of that. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. And I hope that your projects are going well. And if there's any way that we can help, please don't hesitate to. Oh, wait, no, there's a question here. Hold on. Yeah, Kevin wants to point out that there is a portal link, and I'm going to take that and copy it. Thank you, Kevin. I'm going to put this into the chat for everyone. There's a link here that Kevin's pointed out. Should show up in your chat window. If you want to schedule a customer success session to chat with us, you can go ahead and use this link here. Or again, feel free to reach out through the support portal as well. And the way we get to that is just with by going to edx.com and going over to support on the top right of the page. If you've got just a quick and easy question, need help with a file conversion, something like that, our support team can help you out. If you want to sort of dig into the use cases that you're addressing and any pain points with the software and that kind of thing, do feel free to use this link and schedule a customer success session. And it looks like that's all for the questions. Again, thanks for joining, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Talk to you later.